Our involvement with The Third Man began 10 years ago when, as a film laboratory, we carried out the photochemical restoration in order to make a number of release prints of the film as it hadn't been seen in the cinema for many years. This enabled us to have a good understanding of the film itself in terms of its look and its image structure. So when we were given the opportunity to make the 4K digital restoration of the film, the first step we needed to undertake was to examine the film elements that were available anywhere in the world and to examine them to find the best element to make the digital scans. In order to do this, we took a number of different element sources and scanned them at 4K and then screened the end result in the theatre here with the Studio Canal restoration team in order to decide which was the best element. We zoomed in on small areas, we checked sharpness, we checked grain levels, and we made a choice to go from a fine grain element. And this was carried out in association with our restoration film preparation specialist, Marie, who carefully examined the origins of the film and looked at when the dates when these films were first made in order to check that they were the earliest possible elements and therefore the highest quality.
We were given the mandate to find the film element closest to the original camera negative. And we received 4 elements from Pinewood and also from the BFI, something from America as well. The Pinewood elements were late duplicate elements. They were dated from the 90s. So really, they weren't what we were looking for. They were far too late. With The Third Man, a film that was released in 1949 and was filmed in 1948, we were initially looking for something with a film manufacturing code somewhere in the region of 1947 to 1949. So our Pinewood ones were a little bit too late for that. Besides the original camera negative, there's also elements that are called duplicating elements that were created in the laboratory in order to make the release prints. So we need to find out what our film element is initially. We do that by looking at the latent edge printing that the manufacturers included on their film stock. Usually with Kodak, they supplied date information in the form of a code. So that will tell us the year of manufacture, which is important because we can then from there decide whether it was in line with the release dates and the production and post-production of the film, or if it was a late element created after that. So here's where the action started, and this is now printed from the original negative. We can physically see the cut that was in the original negative here. And we can also see the notch that was cut out of this edge, and that was to cue the light change at this change of scene. So we know that this is created from the original negative. We've got our nitrate markings as well. So this tells us that this is a nitrate piece of film. And here at this change of scene, we can also see the Kodak year code as a plus, which meant that the original negative was manufactured in 1948. This matches our production timeline because we know the film was shot in October 1948, then was edited in April 1949, and released in September 1949. So none of the Kodak stock codes are any later than 1949, which places this element well within that time frame.
So having done that and decided on the element we were going to use, we then started the scanning process.
For the third man, we scanned the black and white fine-grained positive on the ARRI scanner at 4K. Before we proceed with scanning, we have to make sure that the machine is calibrated. For 35mm, which is the element that we have here, third man, we have a pitch set to 9 microns. That's the native pitch of the ARRI, more or less. This is what the size of each pixel will be, or the width of each pixel will be at its native setting. Because we're scanning at 4K, we have to sample the image from a 3K native resolution to 6K and then down to 4K. So we've already performed a calibration and we have our 9 micron setting set up, and we have a number of settings within the acquisition mode that will allow us to scan correctly the image. Firstly, we need to make sure that the image geometry is correct, i.e. that we're capturing the whole image and there's no cropping on the edges. Our next step is to make sure that we have the film calibration setting correct so that we're not clipping any data. We've got an ideal setup here with the ARRI because it does 2 passes, or it does a double flash, where it will take a normal exposure of the image and then an overexposed image, 10 times the normal exposure, in order to preserve the detail in low lighted areas and not produce any noise or create any artifacts that would not be true to the original. But this will be the original source scan, uncompressed, 4K, and the starting point at which we will then perform the rest of the restoration.
The digital scans, having been made, are then brought into the theatre where a pre-grade is carried out by a colourist to get the levels right for the restoration process. And then we come back again and do a further grade once the restoration, digital restoration, is complete. The digital restoration process takes place in 2 or 3 stages. The first passes are semi-automated, where there is some cleanup of small amounts of marks and dirt and sparkle, and also the deflickering of the film and the removal of streaking or unevenness is carried out.
So as a shot, as an example here, if I just play that on a loop, not only has it got that instability, we've got a little bit of rotational shift at the start of the shot here. So the way we tackle that, we work on some software called Noir by MTI. We like using the MTI software because we can very specifically target all the manual fixing that we do. So with the stabilisation, we've gone through shot by shot, the manual tracking, and smoothed it out. So what I'll do to start with is mark an in and an out point through the body of the shot. So we want to smooth that down. What we've got are options to adjust any rotational instability. So I'll need 2 tracking points for that. So we apply the manual tracking points. After the tracking points have been applied and the tracking has completed, we've got options of either smoothing between the in and out point or removing all instability to certain anchor points, either to or from a cut. So we've got our 2 tracking points on this shot now. We've got a graph that shows us what the instability is. That's the tracking information, and the blue line is the line we want to achieve with the smoothing. So I shall render that section of the shot now. So if we play that in a loop again, you can see it's settled down quite a bit more. What we have also got in this shot is a little bit of warping, just where there's slight distortion on the film frames that just makes it look a little bit unsettled as well, and especially if we look at the start of the shot, we've got the rotational instability, and there's actually a little bit of distortion in the frame as well. So we will use the de-warp tool, and this will correct any distortion in the frame. So I'll add multiple tracking points. It works like the stabilising. It'll track the points, but rather than keeping a fixed aspect ratio, it will pull any distortion back into whatever you choose to be the anchor frame. The aim we have when we're doing the stabilising and de-warping is to make sure there's nothing too distracting for the viewer. So anything that may detract from being absorbed in the film. We want to maintain the integrity of the original element, but just smooth out anything that will detract from the viewer experience.
So once the film has been stabilised and de-warped, we run it through a semi-automated dirt and dust pass. So I could just run you through some of the techniques we use to get rid of as much dirt as we can to save time in the manual despot, basically. We treat each shot individually, so we chop the reel up into shots. And a film of this age has got a lot of dirt and dust and sparkle on, so we really want to run it as heavy as we can. But of course, there's some shots with a lot of movement in where we can't run it too hard. An ideal shot would be a shot like this, really, where nice and static, where you can really sort of push the dirt filters up to a higher level. If you can see all the red dots here is all the dirt that's getting removed, and there's no movement in the shot, so you're not creating any artifacts, taking away any detail or any grain. Temptation would be to run this even higher maybe, but then you are just attacking maybe bits of grain and bits of detail. With some shots, there's a fair bit of movement at the beginning of the shot, like in this one, but then towards the middle of the shot, it stays still. So what you can do with a shot like this is you can chop the shot up into bits, so maybe the first bit where there's a lot of movement, you can run on a slightly lower setting, and then as the guy stops, you can turn the filter up to get rid of a lot more dirt, and then towards the end, when there's a bit more movement again, you turn it down again. So like I said, the temptation would be to run the whole shot on the heavier setting, but then you're going to create artifacts. So you can see there on the movement, as the guy moves his hand, it's eating away slightly at the details of his coat, which is not what you want. So that's where we run it a bit lower. What we can also do is draw a shape around something. So this is a relatively static shot here. You can see there's not much going on. The only movement really is from this pipe here where there's some water flowing out of it. So what we can do is draw a shape around the water, and what we're doing, the dirt filter is just being applied everywhere except for within that shape. What we can also do, I mean, that previously we keyed out the water pipe. It's quite a small key there, so any dirt within that key can just get removed manually. Here, there's a much bigger area where there's a lot of movement. So there's no movement in this bit, so we can key around this bit and apply quite a bit of a heavier setting. And then in this section of the screen here, we can apply a much lighter dirt setting. So you're still getting rid of some of the dirt. There's a fair bit of dirt and sparkle on the right-hand side of this film. So you can still get rid of bits of dust and dirt without causing any artifacts in the water here.
Once this has been carried out, but no major restoration has occurred at this stage, we go into the digital restoration room where the manual restoration processes are carried out. And here we have a team of restoration specialists who go through each of the elements frame by frame and restore them literally on a frame by frame basis, removing dirt, sparkle, any blemishes, any tears or damage to the film, and make the films effectively like they were originally shown in the cinema.
Using the same bit of kit that we use for the stabilising and dewarp pass, we've got another set of tools at our disposal. These are mainly, with this we'll use the DRS tool, the scratch tool and the paint tool. Now the DRS tool works in such a way as to you can either look at the frames behind both the frames or frames in the future. So when you find a piece of dirt, I'll just zoom in so you can see here, you can very simply just draw a box around it and it will look at the surrounding frames and do a pretty much seamless fix. So you can see there. If you have sort of density fluctuations or any other sort of like lighting issues or anything, you can change the density and you can adjust it to make it brighter or darker. And likewise, you can adjust the grain and move it. So if you've got a shot where there's any kind of movement, you can more accurately match that so it fits seamlessly in. The other main tools that we use is the scratch tool, and this allows you to do either single frame or multiple fixes over several frames. So as you see here, with a scratch, we can simply draw a box around that there, and as you can see, the scratch shows up here as that peak in the graph. And if it were to be offside, we can adjust it so we can see that this is the area that it's looking at, and it will basically interpret the surrounding pixels. Each of these small blocks represents a pixel, so it's looking at those. So we want to get it sort of fairly narrow, but to include sort of any of the sort of like the dark kind of shading that generally surrounds the scratch. And then by simply that, you can see that that's disappeared completely. Okay, one of the other major tools that we use is the paint tool. And this is a very, very useful tool when we're dealing with a lot of the sort of like more major damage, including tears. Thankfully, there haven't been too many tears or severe problems with the man, but it does allow you to manually select the frames that you want to be looking at. So here we're looking 2 frames ahead, and as you can see, you can line up, and you have various views to be able to see how you can line up the 2 different frames, and it does exactly as it says on the tin. It paints straight through to the frame that you want.
Having done that, we then come back with the restored film and project it in the theatre with our colourist, who goes through and carries out scene by scene colour correction and density correction to get the film looking as close as possible to the reference sources that we have. In this case, we have a print and some digital references to go by, but essentially to get the right contrast and character that the third man itself deserves.
Once I get the film back in, I do the first pass, which takes scene to scene grading and just sort of evens out the shots. And then on my second pass, I'll go through and do finer adjustments where the dissolve between two shots might pop. I sort of use keyframes to even out and make the dissolve as smooth as it can be, and just refine the process. As a reference, I used a print. We have the capability to screen the print in the theatre, and so we can have side by side if we need to, and just use it as a guide for the first pass, and then on the second pass is where I might sort of change it compared to how I think the scene should run. So I start with the flat scan and just basically bring down the levels, making sure that I'm not clipping or crushing anything on the pre-grade, because I want to be able to get all the information when I do my final grade. So I'm just giving it a bit more contrast so you can see the difference, and then that allows the restoration tools to pick out the dirt, and it sort of brings out any dirt and scratches. Then go on to the next shot, and for the pre-grade generally I can just quickly paste my grade from before straight over the top. Maybe just check the highlights and bring it down, and then just go through quickly pasting all the grade from before over the top, and that's quite a quick way to get through the pre-grade. When you come to your final grade, add another layer and then go in and sort of bring down the mid-tones, bring up the highlights, make sure my black level's sort of sitting on 0. You can see from the pre-grade we've come quite a long way already. And then I might do a shape if there's, on this film there's a field issue, so one side is lighter than the other, so I can add a grade with a shape. So we've got a shape coming across, which would then allow me to lift up one side of the picture, just as an example. Obviously I wouldn't take it that far, but you can then decide where you want that matte to go, so that you can get an even field across the picture. And that correction I used quite a lot throughout the film, as I say, because there was an issue across the picture. Again, then you can try and paste the grade before. It doesn't always work, so you might choose that and then go and make more corrections on top. So it's sort of building it up as you go along. And then at the end I'd go back and just watch through the scene and make sure that it all flows together.
This restoration process has to be very carefully and sympathetically carried out so that the character of the film isn't altered in any way. The purpose of the restoration process is to give the best possible viewing experience of the film and to make it as close as possible to the way in which the film was seen when it was originally shown.